Eugene Bunch, gentleman train robber. In Hunting Charm, the character Francois Martin is a man solely of my own invention. There were, however, a couple of reasonably well-known outlaws with origins in Louisiana that figured into the characterization. One of the more interesting was a man by the name of Eugene Bunch. Bunch spent at least some of his adult life as a schoolteacher in Louisiana. He later moved to Gainesville, Texas, where he worked as an editor for a local newspaper. By 1888 or so, Bunch apparently found the life of writing stories about local life in Gainesville too dull, and he began robbing trains. Bunch, sometimes called the gentleman train robber, got his reputation because it is said he spoke in a kind way to folks he robbed on trains. There is some evidence that he refused to take women's purses, but I found another source that disputed that story. One story about Bunch from the Daily Picayune, a New Orleans newspaper, recounts a few details of the man's career as a robber. Bunch was regarded as something of an expert with firearms, and the newspaper article talks about Bunch visiting a New Orleans gun shop called Folsom's. At Folsom's, Bunch made the acquaintance of a gunsmith named Geneste. Mr. Geneste testifies in the article of Bunch's interest in guns. The gunsmith also tells of how Bunch made an unusual request. Bunch wanted his .38 caliber rifle rebored for .40 caliber ammunition. Geneste wrote the Remington Company asking if such a change was possible, but the newspaper article doesn't report on whether the change was possible. During the same visit, Bunch asked the gunsmith to clean a small scope, and Bunch was pleased with Geneste's work, claiming after the cleaning he could hit a man at 1,000 yards. Later, Bunch returned to the gun shop with a long-barreled .41 caliber Colt single-action pistol. Bunch wanted 2 inches cut from the barrel. Geneste suggested rather than modify the pistol, Bunch purchase a Colt .44 caliber double-action pistol, claiming the double-action pistol fired faster and more reliably than the single-action pistol. I am assuming at that time the newer gun, the .44 caliber, was deemed superior to the single-action pistol because of its superior design. The interesting part of the story is that when Geneste offered the newer gun, Bunch demonstrated what some fans of Western lore call fanning. That is, the rapid slapping of a single-action gun's hammer back to fire the gun rapidly. I can't say if Bunch himself invented the technique of fanning. I do know the technique is used nowadays by some gun exhibitionists and doesn't lend itself to accuracy. Fanning can also be dangerous as the rapid firing can damage the gun. If one researches the topic of fanning, which we're all familiar with from Western movies, he or she might find that the technique was largely popularized in dime westerns and serialized Western movies from the silent era through the 1950s. One might also see a gunslinger in more recent film fanning, though modern movies are more interested in accuracy. In other words, fanning probably wasn't something that people in the Old West, gunslingers in the Old West, were doing with any regularity. I found it interesting to see that the technique existed at least as early as 1888, though I cannot say if the gentleman train robber Eugene Bunch invented the technique. Over the course of 4 years, it is said Bunch robbed as much as $100,000 from trains running mostly in Louisiana. That figure may be exaggerated because I have read other reports stating Bunch robbed somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000. Either way, those are impressive numbers for the time. The amounts were enough that Bunch and his compatriot, a man named Hopgood, lived extravagant lifestyles in eastern Louisiana on an estate located just north of New Orleans near the border with Mississippi. The railroad companies, both the Louisiana-Texas line and the Southwestern lines, hired Pinkerton detectives to track Bunch and Hopgood, and in August of 1892, Bunch was killed at a place called Honey Island, sometimes called Lonely Island, which is located in a swampish area that rests alongside the border between Louisiana and Mississippi, east of the present-day town of Slidell. A report from a newspaper called the Rockland Journal states that when they located Bunch's body, they found he wore a specially made vest lined with pockets, which Bunch filled with ammunition, thereby creating a sort of body armor. The shootout that led to Bunch's death is described in vivid detail without regard to proper spelling, so it's a bit hard to decipher. Nevertheless, it seems Bunch was shot 5 times, but didn't die immediately. He managed to travel on foot some distance from the site of the initial shootout before dying in a field. That's it for today's Plate of History Beans. I'll have a couple of links below if you would like to know more about Eugene Bunch or the technique of fanning. I'll also have a link to my author's page on Amazon if you would like to check out my books. Now it's time for Chapter 35 of Hunting Charm, A Darkness Inside. Chapter 35, A Darkness Inside. Matt saw Francois Martin arrive early the next morning. He had been anxiously wondering about the man. Had Martin gone after Brant and Cecil? Had he found them? Matt felt encouraged when Martin and Tarwater argued. Clearly things hadn't gone as planned. He could also see that Martin's right hand was bound with a blood-soaked cloth. The argument between Theo and his hired gun lasted several minutes. Then the stockman gave Martin a handful of gold coins. A few minutes later, after gathering a few things, the assassin climbed back on his horse and left. Immediately after, Tarwater walked to Matt, wearing the same weary expression, something between anger and sorrow. Things didn't work out? Matt couldn't keep a sarcastic tone from his voice. He felt no sympathy for Theo. Tarwater glared at him, started to speak, then stormed away, kicking at the fire and sending a shower of sparks into the air. A few minutes later, the one-eyed cowboy with the rancid teeth came over and released Matt. "Mr. Tarwater says we might just as well untie you," he said. Matt walked slowly toward the tents and sat down by the fire. The one-eyed cowboy handed him an enameled cup and motioned toward a coffee pot. Matt poured himself a cup, wincing at the bitter, hot brew. A half minute later, Tarwater reappeared and after a long moment squatted at Matt's side. "Martin says he's done," Theo said. "I reckon we need to discuss things." "Sounds like good news. I'm partial to Hunter. Besides, you didn't strike me as the type of man who makes a bed with criminals. Martin's face is on wanted posters in Kansas, and I imagine other places as well." "I still intend to see Johnson stand trial." Matt started to reply, but then simply nodded. Hopefully they would find Doreen in Fort Worth, though he had no idea what she might say. Theo, still angry, snapped at one of the men to get him some coffee, then spat out the bitter brew, ordering another pot. "You're not supposed to boil it, you idiot." Theo said. Matt once again wondered at the change in Theo. When they had met, Tarwater had seemed less bitter about his daughter's disappearance. What else had happened in the past few weeks? When Matt spoke, he measured his words carefully. Theo, I know this must have been a difficult time for you, but even if we don't find Doreen in Fort Worth, we have no reason to believe she's dead. Tarwater lowered his head and cleared his throat. My wife died, he said. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Another long moment passed. When Theo spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I never thought that everything I spent my youth working for would turn out to be nothing. When I was a young man, I figured being a little smarter than the next man, working a little harder. Well, I figured I was. Hell, I figured I was more than a little smarter, and I worked damn hard. You accomplished more than most men. Matt didn't feel particularly sympathetic, but reminded himself that Theo had been, and still was, a solid contributor to his community. The man had taken a hard fall. You think these damn women would appreciate that? They did, and I'm telling you, your daughter is alive. If she was ungrateful for a while, she'll come to appreciate you more as time goes along. It's part of growing up, Theo. You know that. A tear rolled down Tarwater's face. The man gulped, struggling to control his emotions. I can't figure out when she went from being my little girl to... How did she come to hate me so? Theo, what should I have done differently? The two men sat in silence. Matt had no idea how to respond to Tarwater's question. He didn't have enough knowledge of the relationship between Theo and Doreen Tarwater. When he placed a hand on Theo's shoulder, the stockman brushed it away and stood. My boys will shoot you if you try to run. You men pack up this gear. We're leaving. Tarwater's crew worked quickly, striking the tents and packing the mules. Theo stood, glared at the horizon, then strode several yards away to wait beneath a stand of black oak. When they were ready to travel, Matt, thankfully, was given a horse with a saddle. They continued south, traveling the next 2 days, following the same trail Doreen had traversed several weeks earlier. When they arrived at the Red River, Theo said he had no desire to talk to anyone from the bridge construction crew. Brent, however, was allowed to enter the camp. It didn't take long to find several cowboys that remembered Doreen. When Brent reported back to camp, he spared Theo the details of his daughter's business venture, but did mention that he now had proof she was alive and had been heading for Fort Worth. Upon hearing the news, Theo said nothing. They continued west along the freshly laid railroad tracks. Matt tried on several occasions to strike up a conversation with Theo, but each time the stockyard owner simply glared at him and remained silent. So instead he turned to the remaining 4 men in Theo's search party, regaling them with stories of past adventures with Brent and tales of a Texas lawman named Crater McLean that he corresponded with regularly. In the evenings, Theo, who refused to join the group for conversation, retired to his tent where one or another of the men served his meals. After 5 more days on the trail, the men in Theo's group had clearly grown fond of Matt. Still, the group, comprised of men who had drifted from place to place, knew their place, and as they entered Fort Worth, they moved into a protective circle around their employer. What day is it? Matt asked. I reckon it's Sunday, though it might be a Tuesday, the toothless cowboy said. Matt nodded, looking around uneasily at the frontier town. They rode by the stockyards, the bawling of livestock, whistle and hoot of cowboys, acrid smells of manure and rotting cow flesh assailing their senses. Theo stopped at the jailhouse and motioned for Matt to follow. For a moment, Matt wondered if Tarwater planned to have him arrested. If Theo claimed Matt had aided a colored man in kidnapping his daughter, the sheriff might throw him in jail. Inside, they were greeted by a clerkish-looking deputy wearing a dark suit and bowler hat seated behind an oak desk. A rack filled with Henry rifles hung on a wall plastered with wanted posters. "I'm looking for my daughter," Theo told the deputy. "Who's your daughter?" The clerk peered over the tops of his glasses. "She was abducted by a colored mule trader and may have wandered here after escaping her captivity in the territories." The last bit caught the deputy's attention. He stopped writing and placed his pen on the desk. When he replied, his voice remained flat and expressionless. "Kidnapped by a colored boy, you say? That's a mighty hard lot. Still don't explain how she come to be here in Fort Worth." "I have it on the word of others that she came here after escaping." "The alleged kidnapper told us she was coming here," Matt said. "She wasn't kidnapped." The deputy looked back and forth at Theo and Matt. "Was she kidnapped or not?" he asked. "Yes." "No." The clerk chuckled, looking back and forth at Theo and Matt. "You gentlemen seem to have a difference of opinion. Is the kidnapper with you?" "He's not with us, but his damn partner has the man, and we don't know where the hell they are holed up. If I find them, I'm gonna be looking for a tree," Tarwater interrupted. "Lynching is a hanging offense in these parts." The deputy glared at Theo. "Without a trial, that is, in which case it's a hanging and not a lynching." "We have no intention of lynching the man," Tarwater muttered, glaring at Matt. "But I do believe he needs to stand trial." "Don't get any ideas or you're liable to be the one on the tree. Personally, I'm prone to take the word of white folks over colored folks, but Sheriff James plays it straight. He'll put a bullet in any man who tries to string up a feller, colored, Mexican, whatever, unless they get tried proper first." "When will the sheriff be back?" Matt asked. "Well, sir, now that's a problem. It could be several days. He and the judge rode out for Austin. They got a big to-do down there for all the lawmen in the state. New rules and regulations come in from up north. Danged war and general stubbornness kept things as they were for a good while, but looks like we're gonna have to get things in line. I'm running the show for the next 6 or 7 days." "I suggest you arrest this man right here." Theo Tarwater pointed at Matt. "Until such time as he makes arrangements to produce the man that kidnapped my daughter." "What the hell did he do?" The deputy looked at Tarwater incredulously. "He is obstructing justice, you idiot!" Tarwater shouted. "Speak to me like that again and I'm going to throw your butt in jail." The deputy glared at Theo. "Do you know who I am?" "I don't care if your last name is Vanderbilt. If you raise your voice in my direction one more time, your ass is going in the cell with old Ronnie back there. Ronnie ain't had a bath since he was in knickers, and he ain't ate nothing but beans for the past week." Tarwater paused, then, with an odd sigh, his expression changed once again to one of bleary-eyed despondency. He lowered his hand slowly, raised it a second time, then said nothing. "We are still looking for his daughter," Matt said. "Her name is Doreen." The deputy looked at Matt for a long moment, then chuckled. "Why didn't you say that already? I know Miss Doreen, though I reckon she ain't expecting her daddy. Unless, that is, Her daddy has a few dollars in his pocket and a little wood in his drawers. You know where she is? Theo's eyes narrowed. Just head southwest of town. You'll come to a sign that says Paradise. That's the place. They got it all fixed up. I reckon they're closed on Sunday, though. She just opened maybe 6 or 8 weeks back, but folks say it's the best place in town. What do you mean, it's by the best place in town? Theo asked. Well, you know, a place for entertainment and such. Miss Doreen is mighty pretty and young. The deputy seemed to forget himself for a moment and grinned. Blonde hair, curves in all the right places, if you know what I'm saying. As the deputy described Doreen, Matt could see Theo's anger rise. He barely managed to grab the stockyard owner as he lunged for the deputy. That's my daughter you're talking about, Theo roared. You are talking about her as if she were a common prostitute. As Matt struggled to keep Theo from assaulting the deputy, one of Tarwater's flailing arms caught him squarely in the side of the head. Nevertheless, Matt managed to hang on. It took him nearly a minute before he was able to steer Theo to the door. You best be glad this young feller's here to keep you from jumping on me, the bespectacled deputy called out. Assaulting an officer is hanging a fence. Now, I didn't say your daughter was a common prostitute. Hell, there ain't nothing common about her from what I hear. The deputy laughed as Matt shoved Tarwater outside. Theo struggled for another minute before his fit of rage passed. Once more the stockman went from furious to morose in a matter of seconds. Matt still had a difficult time reconciling Tarwater's new personality with the jovial man he had met a few weeks earlier. Mount up, we're heading out, Theo said. Move it! The other men who had been talking to some of the locals had already determined the location of Doreen's thriving new business. As they climbed aboard their ponies, the chubby cowboy named Seth, forgetting himself, said, I reckon we wouldn't be getting any pussy out that way. Tarwater wheeled, drawing his pistol. He seemed ready to fire. The entire group froze. That's my daughter you're talking about. Tarwater was once again enraged. Seth gulped, his expression turning from one of youthful exuberance to terror. Shooting the boy won't change things. Matt placed a hand on Theo's arm. Mr. Tarwater, you don't want to do this. You don't talk about a man's daughter that way, Theo shouted, the pistol quivering in his hand. You're fired. Get off my horse and be on your way. Seth looked around at the others. Seeing he would get no support, the chubby cowboy slowly dismounted. I don't reckon I could get my pay so's I could... You're lucky I don't put a bullet in you where you stand, Tarwater said. As the young cowboy pulled his saddle and other meager belongings from the horse, Matt noted that the blank expression had returned to Theo's face. A moment later, the stockyard owner spoke again. Take the horse, he mumbled. Here's your pay. Tarwater flipped a handful of gold coins into the dirt at Seth's feet. Now get the hell out of here! Tarwater wheeled and spurred his horse. The 3 remaining cowboys followed, kicking up dust, ignoring Seth, who began resaddling his pinto. During the exchange, something caught Matt's eye. He squinted to see through the afternoon haze to get a clearer view. A trio of riders approached from the east. A moment later, Matt was sure of it. It was Cecil Johnson on his mule leading 2 horses, one carrying Brant's slumped figure, and the third pulling a travois.